So we have 3 check your understanding questions for you to pause the video and work out, and then unpause to come back and see if you got it right. So choice B is the correct answer, 110.08 to 118.92. So if you did not get, check the following things. First of all, make sure you chose Z interval because your sample size was greater than 30. You had 42 in your sample size. Also be careful. Remember, when you're doing the Z interval in your calculator, it asks for standard deviation first, which is 12.3, and then it wants the sample mean, which was 114.5. So if you got it wrong, it might be because you accidentally reversed those two, thinking that they would go in the same order that they were given to you here. Okay, here's question 2. And your correct answer is A. Now, since this is talking about dollars and cents, that's why they rounded to the nearest hundredth. So your interval, when you round to the nearest hundredth, 61.20 and 67.40. If you did not get that answer, make sure that you did the T interval this time. You had less than 30 in your sample size. You had a sample of 15. So you had to do T interval. And then again, they reversed the order of the mean and standard deviation. Well, they reverse it from the Z interval, so just be careful of that. Make sure you're putting 0.95 in for the C level. Don't just put 95. So hopefully, if you did not get the right answer, it's one of those 3 mistakes. Okay, last question. Pause and then come back to see if you got it right. And the correct answer is D. Notice they rounded everything to 3 decimal places. So even though your calculator is displaying 5 decimal places, if you round to the nearest 3 decimals, 0.737 and 0.823, make sure that you chose 1 prop Z int, not 1 prop Z test or anything else. 1 prop Z int. I don't know why I was doing these other things. And the reason you chose that is because this is a proportion problem. You were looking for the population proportion, so you had to use the proportion one. And so when you put the information in, if you got error, it might be because you put these 2 numbers in the wrong order. The survey was of 250, so N was 250. And X, which is how many had high-speed internet, X was 195. If you got those reversed, if you put them into the calculator in the same order in which they appeared here, your calculator would tell you error. So if you got an error message, that's probably why. So just make sure you're kind of reading carefully.